The widow traded her last mule for a map written in Apache blood. Folks in Dry Creek said no sane soul would touch such a thing. But Marybeth Hale folded the red-stained hide and rode anyway. One borrowed saddle. No rifle. No food worth naming. Only that map. And the grave they'd dug for her husband 3 weeks ago. Wind scraped the prairie hard that morning. Then old rancher Silas Boone saw the mark on the hide. His face strained pale as winter bone. "Widow, you didn't buy a treasure. You bought a war." Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. The wind had a way of speaking to empty houses. It pushed slow across the prairie and slipped through the loose boards of Silas Boone's ranch house, making the old timbers groan like tired bones. Most nights, that wind was the only voice Silas heard. Boot heels scraped the floor as he crossed the small room and dropped into the chair beside the stove. The iron belly gave off a dull heat. Not much. Just enough to keep frost from biting through the planks. A tin cup knocked softly against the table as Silas set it down. Coffee gone cold hours ago. He drank it anyway. Outside, the prairie stretched black and silent under a sky thick with winter stars. A mule brayed somewhere down the road. Thin. Lonely. Silas leaned back, the chair legs creaking beneath his weight. 3 years since the grave on the hill. 3 years since the last voice that had filled this house with laughter. Now the only sound most nights was the wind clawing the eaves and the slow tick of the stove cooling. He had grown used to the quiet. Men who survived too many wars often did. Then the mule screamed again. Louder this time. Closer. Silas lifted his head. Boot leather brushed the floor as he stood. The door hinges complained when he pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting his lungs. Moonlight spilled silver across the yard. And there she stood. A young woman beside a sway-backed mule. Her coat hung thin against the wind. Hair whipped across her face. One gloved hand gripped the mule's reins. The other held something folded tight against her chest. She looked barely strong enough to stay standing. The mule shifted and snorted, breath fogging the night. Silas studied her a long moment. Strangers rarely came this far from town. And when they did, it usually meant trouble was riding behind them. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice came rough from disuse. The woman shook her head slowly. Her boots scraped the frozen dirt as she stepped forward. "I'm Marybeth Hale." Her words trembled in the wind. "I traded my last mule for something I don't understand." The mule tugged against the reins as if offended by the sentence. Marybeth lifted the folded hide in her hands. Moonlight caught the dark stains on its surface. The marks weren't ink. Silas Boone knew that color too well. Old blood. The wind rattled the loose boards of the barn. Silas felt the cold crawl down his spine. "Where'd you get that?" "A trader in Dry Creek." Her voice dropped lower. "He said it was a map." The hide shifted in the wind, and strange symbols flashed across its surface. Trail marks. Apache marks. Silas Boone's jaw tightened. Men had gone to war over less. He stepped back from the doorway. The floorboards groaned as he moved aside. Best come in before that wind takes the rest of your strength. Marybeth hesitated only a second. Then her boots crossed the threshold. And the empty house was quiet no longer. Morning came slow across the Boone ranch. Gray light seeped through the window glass while frost clung to the edges like thin lace. The stove had gone quiet during the night. Ash settled soft in the iron belly. Silas Boone woke to the sound of movement. Not wind. Not the barn boards rattling. Footsteps. Light ones. He sat up in the narrow bed. Floorboards creaked down the hall. Then the scrape of a chair. The small thump of something set on the table. Silas pulled on his boots. Leather rasped against the floor as he stood. The house smelled different. Not dust. Not cold ash. Coffee. Fresh. He stepped into the main room. Marybeth Hale stood beside the stove. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, pale arms red from the cold water she must have carried from the pump. Steam curled from a dented kettle. The iron stove door clanged shut under her hand. She glanced back. A nervous look. Like a stranger unsure if she had crossed a line. I found beans in the cupboard. Her voice stayed quiet. I hope you don't mind. Silas looked at the table. 2 cups. 2 plates. The sound of bubbling coffee filled the room. A warm sound. Strange in a house that had forgotten it. He pulled out the chair. The legs scraped slow across the boards. You cook like that every morning, Miss Hale? Marybeth shook her head. A tired smile touched her mouth. Only when the man who owns the house might throw me out. Silas lifted the tin cup. Heat pressed into his palms. He took a sip. Strong. Hot. Good. Outside, the wind pushed across the prairie again. The barn doors rattled. Cold against warm. Silas leaned back in the chair. Your mule's still tied out there. Marybeth nodded. I know. Silence settled for a moment. Then she spoke again. I learned my stay. Her eyes stayed on the table. Fence work. Cleaning. Cooking. Silas looked toward the window. Sunlight was beginning to push over the ridge. Thin gold across frozen ground. Fence lines blown out west of the creek. He stood. The chair creaked behind him. You know how to swing a hammer? Marybeth lifted her chin. I buried my husband myself. Silas studied her. No tears. Just quiet iron. He nodded once. Then grab a coat. The wind struck hard when they stepped outside. It howled through the cottonwoods and slapped loose in against the barn wall. The mule brayed loud, stamping frost from its hooves. Marybeth tightened the scarf around her neck. Silas handed her a hammer. Cold metal. Posts first. The ground rang dull beneath the blows. Hammer striking wood. Wood striking frozen earth. The sound echoed across the empty pasture. Noise where silence used to live. Marybeth worked steady. Not fast. Not slow. Just stubborn. Her breath came wide in the cold air. Silas watched without saying much. Men learned a lot from silence. An hour passed. Then 2. The fence line slowly rose again. Wind bending the wire. Posts biting into earth. Marybeth paused once. Only once. She leaned against the hammer. Mr. Boone. Silas kept twisting the wire tight. Silas. She nodded. Silas. Her eyes drifted toward the hills. Far ridge. Gray against the sky. Did anyone ride past here lately? Silas followed her gaze. Nothing moved. Just grass. Just wind. No. Marybeth didn't answer right away. The hammer tapped once against the ground. Soft. I thought I saw riders yesterday. Silas felt the cold tighten behind his ribs. From town? I don't know. The wind carried a faint sound then. Far away. Hooves. Maybe. Maybe just loose branches knocking in the trees. Silas straightened. His eyes narrowed toward the ridge. The sound faded again. Silence returned. But the quiet felt different now. Thinner. Like ice ready to crack. Marybeth returned to hammering. Bang. 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 The noise carried across the prairie. Alive. Defiant. By afternoon the sun burned pale through the clouds. Snow melted in slow drops from the barn roof. Inside the house the stove roared again. Wood popping in the heat. Marybeth stood over a pot. Steam fogged the small kitchen window. Silas wiped his boots on the mat. The smell hit him first. Stew. Real food. Not beans from a tin. His chair creaked as he sat down. Marybeth filled the bowls. The spoon scraped the pot. You always cook like this? She shrugged. Not when I'm alone. Silas lifted the bowl. Warmth spread through his hands again. He glanced toward the shelf above the stove. The folded hide sat there. Still. Quiet. But the red stains caught the firelight. Dark as dried rust. Marybeth followed his gaze. Her shoulders stiffened. Have you looked at it? Silas ate another spoonful before answering. Yes. She waited. What is it? He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Trouble. Marybeth didn't argue. Outside, the barn door slammed once under the wind. The mule brayed loud in the darkening yard. Marybeth's eyes flicked toward the window again. Those riders I mentioned. Silas leaned back in the chair. The wood creaked under his weight. If they come. His voice stayed calm. They'll find a house that doesn't scare easy. The fire snapped loud in the stove. Warmth filled the room. But outside the prairie had grown quiet again. Too quiet. And somewhere beyond the hills, men might already be riding. Night settled hard over the Boone ranch. Wind slid low through the grass and brushed the barn walls with a dry whisper. Inside the house the stove burned steady. Wood popped. Iron ticked as heat spread through the small room. Silas Boone sat at the table with the oil lamp pulled close. The yellow light trembled across the wood. Across the folded hide, Marybeth Hale stood near the stove. She stirred the pot slow. Spoon scraping metal. Steam rising warm into the cold air of the kitchen. Silas opened the hide. The leather crackled softly. Old. Weathered. Dark stains spread across its surface like dried rivers. Not ink. Blood. Marybeth didn't look at it. Not yet. You said a trader sold it to you. Silas traced a finger along the strange markings. Yes. Her voice stayed quiet. He told me it came from Apache country. The wind rattled the window glass. Silas leaned closer to the lamp. The symbols sharpened in the light. Lines. Notches. Circles carved into the hide. Trail signs. Old ones. He had seen them once. Long ago. Before the wars burned through the territory. This isn't a treasure map. Marybeth finally turned. Her spoon stopped moving. What is it then? Silas tapped one of the symbols. A curved line cut deep into the leather. Apache trail mark. Another mark beside it. 3 shortcuts. Water. He moved to a jagged symbol near the center. Canyon. Marybeth stepped closer to the table. The floorboards creaked under her boots. Her eyes followed the markings. So it leads somewhere. Silas nodded slowly. Yes. Her hands tightened around the back of the chair. Then my husband wasn't crazy. Silas glanced up. You didn't mention a husband chasing this. Marybeth's breath came out slow. Cold air fogged in front of her face. Thomas found the map 6 months ago. She touched the edge of the hide. Lightly. Like it might bite. He said it marked something hidden. The wind outside rose for a moment. Loose tin on the barn roof clattered. Marybeth's voice lowered. He rode out to find it. Silas already knew the rest. He never came back. Marybeth nodded once. The stove popped loud behind her. Warmth filled the room, but her face stayed pale. Silas folded the hide halfway. Men disappear chasing things like this. Marybeth didn't move. Thomas wasn't chasing gold. Silas waited. She pointed to the center of the hide. Look closer. Silas leaned in again. The lamp flickered. The leather shifted in the light. There. Scratched deeper than the others. A small mark. 2 crossing lines. A circle carved around them. Silas felt his jaw tighten. He knew that sign. He had seen it once on a rock wall in Apache country. Peace cache. Marybeth frowned. What does that mean? Silas leaned back slowly. The chair creaked. During the wars, Apache tribes hid things. Gold sometimes. But more often treaties. Documents. Proof of land. Marybeth's eyes widened. So the canyon might hold. Silas cut her off. Yes. The wind outside dropped suddenly. Silence pressed against the windows. Then the mule in the yard snorted sharp. Hooves shuffled against frozen dirt. Marybeth turned toward the door. What was that? Silas didn't answer right away. He listened. Far off. Very faint. A sound carried across the prairie. Hoofbeats. Maybe. Maybe not. The sound faded again. Wind brushed the grass like nothing had happened. Silas stood. Boot leather scraped the floor. He crossed to the window. Moonlight washed pale across the yard. The mule shifted again. Ears pointed toward the distant hills. Silas looked hard toward the ridge. Nothing moved. Still. Too still. Behind him the lamp flame flickered. Marybeth spoke softly. Do you think someone else knows about the map? Silas didn't turn yet. If a traitor had it, he probably talked. Marybeth's shoulders sagged. The room felt colder suddenly. Silas closed the window shutter halfway. The wood thumped softly. Then he returned to the table. He folded the hide tight. The leather crackled again. Marybeth watched him. What will you do with it? Silas slid the map into the tin box beside the stove. The lid snapped shut. Metal ringing softly in the quiet room. For now. It stays here. Marybeth stared at the box. Like it might start breathing. Outside the wind returned. Cold again. Restless. She crossed to the stove and added another log. The fire caught quick. Flames licking bright against the iron. Warm light filled the room. Silas sat again. Marybeth poured 2 cups of coffee. Steam curled upward. She set one beside him. The cup tapped the table. You didn't throw me out. Silas lifted the cup. Heat pressed into his palms. No. Marybeth wrapped her hands around her own cup. Even after seeing the map. Silas took a slow drink. Outside the prairie stretched wide and dark. Inside the house the fire cracked warm and loud. Finally he answered. This house has been too quiet for too long. Marybeth gave a small nod. The stove hummed steady. The mule settled in the yard. But far beyond the hills, where moonlight touched the ridge, a faint echo of hooves might still have been riding. Morning sunlight crept slow across the Boone ranch. Thin gold over frost. Wind brushed the tall grass in quiet waves. Inside the house the stove crackled loud. Marybeth Hale stood at the table kneading dough. Her sleeves rolled high. Flour dusted her hands. The wooden board thumped softly with each push of her palms. Silas Boone sat near the window sharpening a knife. Stone sliding against steel. Slow. Patient. The sound filled the room. Noise where silence once lived. The mule shifted outside. Harness jingled faint through the open window. Marybeth glanced toward the sound. "You always wake before the sun?" Silas didn't look up. "Habit." The blade flashed once in the morning light. "You?" Marybeth pushed the dough again. The board creaked under pressure. "Habit now." Silas tested the knife edge with his thumb. Sharp. He set it down. Coffee steamed between them on the table. The house smelled like bread. Warm. Alive. Outside the barn door banged once under a gust. Marybeth froze. Just for a breath. Then she wiped flour from her hands. "Wind's picking up." Silas stood. Boot heels thumped the floor. He stepped onto the porch. Cold air struck his face hard. The prairie stretched quiet. But something had changed. Tracks cut across the yard. Fresh ones. Horse tracks. Silas crouched. His fingers brushed the frozen dirt. Still sharp. Still clean. Someone had ridden close in the night. Behind him the door creaked. Marybeth stepped out onto the porch. "What is it?" Silas rose slowly. Rider passed through. Marybeth's eyes moved across the yard. "From town?" "Maybe." The wind lifted her hair. Silas followed the tracks with his eyes. They curved near the barn. Then turned toward the hills. Watching. Passing. Not stopping. But close enough. Too close. Marybeth wrapped her arms around herself. Cold pressing through her coat. Maybe they were just traveling. Silas didn't answer. Travelers didn't ride that quiet. They didn't circle a ranch before leaving. He walked toward the barn. The boards groaned as he pushed the door open. Inside the stall the mule snorted. Hooves shifting in straw. Silas ran a hand along the saddle rack. Still there. Nothing missing. Marybeth stood in the doorway. Light behind her. "What are you looking for?" "Signs." "Of what?" Silas listened. The barn creaked. A loose chain tapped the wall. Nothing else. But the quiet felt thin again. He turned back toward the house. "Let's finish breakfast." Marybeth nodded. Inside the warmth returned quick. The stove roared brighter. The dough rose beside the fire. Marybeth slid bread into the iron oven. The door clanged shut. Silas poured coffee. Steam filled the room again. For a while neither spoke. Just the sound of wood popping in the stove. The scrape of a chair. Then Marybeth broke the quiet. "You think they're looking for the map?" Silas lifted his cup. "Yes." She stared into the fire. "My husband told no one. Maybe the traitor did." Marybeth sighed. The bread smell grew stronger. Warm. Comforting. Outside the wind rattled the window once. Silas leaned back in his chair. "You ever ride far west of here?" Marybeth shook her head. "Thomas said the canyon lies past the Red Hills." Silas nodded. "I know the place." Her eyes lifted fast. "You do?" "Yes." "Have you been there?" Silas looked toward the fire. Flames shifting orange across the iron stove. "Once." Marybeth waited. But he said nothing more. The oven door creaked open. Warm bread came out steaming. Marybeth set the loaf on the table. The knife sliced through the crust. Crunch. Soft inside. They ate in silence. Outside the wind faded. Quiet settled across the prairie again. Almost peaceful. Then the mule brayed sharp. Both heads turned. Silas stood first. Chair legs scraping hard. He stepped to the window. Dust moved along the far ridge. Faint. But there. Marybeth came beside him. "What do you see?" Silas narrowed his eyes. "Three shapes." tiny against the sky. Riders. Moving slow along the ridge line. Watching the valley. Marybeth's voice dropped to a whisper. They found us. Silas shook his head. Not yet. He stepped away from the window. The stove popped loud behind them. Warmth filled the house again. But the air felt tighter. Like a storm building beyond sight. Marybeth folded her arms. What do we do? Silas walked to the shelf. The tin box waited there. Silent. He rested his hand on the lid. For now. We live. Marybeth looked back toward the window. The riders had vanished behind the ridge. Only empty hills remained. The wind returned soft across the grass. Inside the house the fire burned warm. Bread steamed on the table. 2 cups of coffee waited. But somewhere beyond the red hills, men had started riding closer. The morning started quiet. Too quiet. Wind slid low through the grass beyond the ranch house. Inside, the stove burned bright. Wood cracked. Iron ticked warm. Marybeth Hale wiped the table with a damp cloth. The rag slid across the wood with a soft scrape. Silas Boone sat near the window mending a leather strap. Needle pulling through thick hide. Slow. Steady. The mule shifted outside. Harness rings clinked once. Then the sound came. Distant. Hooves. Marybeth froze. The cloth stopped moving. Silas didn't lift his head right away. But the needle paused in his hand. Hooves again. Closer now. 3 riders. Maybe 4. Marybeth stepped toward the window. Silas spoke without looking up. Don't stand in the glass. She moved aside. The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust drifted past the yard fence. Then the horses stopped. Leather creaked outside. Men shifting in their saddles. Silas stood. Boot heels thudded the floor. He opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. The riders waited in the yard. 3 of them. 1 man sat tall in a dark coat. Clean. Too clean for a cattleman. Another wore a sheriff's badge pinned crooked on his vest. Sheriff Conrad Rusk. Silas recognized him at once. The 3rd rider stayed back. A thin man with narrow eyes. Watching. Silas stepped onto the porch. Boards creaked under his weight. Rusk tipped his hat slightly. Morning, Silas Boone. Silas leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. Sheriff. The man in the dark coat smiled. Thin. Like a blade. Victor Langley. His voice smooth as polished wood. I own most of the valley east of here. Silas nodded once. I know who you are. Langley glanced around the yard. The barn. The fence line. The mule tied near the post. His smile widened a little. Quiet place you have. Silas waited. Wind brushed the grass. A loose board on the barn knocked soft. Langley leaned forward in the saddle. We're looking for something. Silas's voice stayed flat. Most men come to town when they're shopping. Langley chuckled lightly. Not shopping. He glanced toward the house door behind Silas. Something passed through Dry Creek last week. Sheriff Russ cleared his throat. A trader mentioned a map. The word hung in the air. Cold. Marybeth stood just inside the doorway. Silas could feel her presence behind him. Quiet. Still. Langley's eyes slid toward the shadow behind Silas. Mind if we speak with the lady? Silas didn't move. She's not part of your business. Langley's horse shifted. Hooves grinding dirt. I think she might be. Silas took one step forward. The porch boards groaned. That's so. Langley reached into his coat. For a moment Marybeth's breath caught behind the door. But Langley pulled out only a folded paper. He waved it lazily. Legal interest. Sheriff Rusk nodded. Anything found in this territory with historical value belongs to the county until properly claimed. Silas's eyes stayed on Langley. Funny. Langley tilted his head. What is? Silas pointed toward the hills. Never seen you care about history before. The thin man behind them laughed once. Short. Ugly. Langley ignored it. His voice cooled slightly. Maps have value, Mr. Boone. Silas shrugged. Not every map leads somewhere. Langley's smile faded. For the first time his eyes hardened. We believe one does. Wind swept across the yard again. Dust lifted along the fence. The mule brayed loud. Marybeth stepped forward into the doorway. Her boots touched the porch boards. Mr. Langley. Silas didn't turn, but he felt the tension shift. Langley's eyes moved to her at once. Recognition flashed there. So you must be Mrs. Hale. Marybeth stood straight despite the wind tugging her coat. Yes. Langley nodded slowly. The widow from Dry Creek. Silas felt the air grow colder. Langley studied her like a merchant judging cattle. We heard you made a trade. Marybeth's voice stayed steady. I did. And the item? Marybeth looked him in the eye. Mine. Sheriff Rusk shifted in his saddle. Ma'am, if that item contains historical significance. Silas stepped between them. The porch boards creaked again. It's private property. Langley sighed softly. Mr. Boone. His tone turned patient. Let's not make this difficult. Silas didn't answer. Langley leaned down slightly from his saddle. His voice dropped low. If that map exists, it belongs to me. The words landed heavy in the cold air. Behind Silas the stove popped loud inside the house. Warmth spilling through the doorway. Langley straightened again. His smile returned. But it no longer reached his eyes. We'll ride out for now. He turned his horse slowly. Leather creaked. Hooves shifted. But before leaving he glanced back once. At some point, Mr. Boone. We'll be back for it. The riders turned toward the ridge. Hooves thudded across the frozen ground. Dust trailing behind them. Marybeth exhaled slowly. Silas watched until the riders reached the far hill. Their shapes shrinking against the sky. Then disappearing beyond the ridge. The wind returned across the empty yard. Soft again. But not peaceful. Silas stepped back inside. The door closed with a dull thud. The stove crackled warm behind them. Marybeth looked at him. They know. Silas nodded once. Yes. Outside the prairie stretched wide and silent again. But somewhere beyond the hills, Victor Langley had already decided the war had begun. 2 days passed. Cold mornings. Wind scraping the grass flat against the prairie. Inside the Boone house the stove burned steady. Marybeth Hale stood at the counter slicing potatoes. Knife tapping wood. Rhythmic. The smell of stew filled the small kitchen. Warm. Comforting. Silas Boone sat near the window with a coil of rope in his lap. His fingers moved slow through the knots. But his eyes stayed on the hills. The prairie looked calm. Too calm. Marybeth noticed. You haven't touched that rope in 10 minutes. Silas didn't answer. The wind brushed the window glass with a dry hiss. Then the mule brayed outside. Sharp. Marybeth glanced toward the door. Silas stood. Boots thumping the floor. He stepped onto the porch. Cold air rushed against his face. Across the valley a rider moved along the fence line. Not close. Not far. Just far enough to watch. Silas leaned one shoulder against the porch post. The rider turned his horse slowly. Then rode on. Marybeth stepped beside him. You know him? Silas nodded. Langley's man. The rider disappeared over a rise. But the feeling stayed. Like someone standing just beyond the door. Watching. Inside the house the stew simmered louder now. The lid rattled on the pot. Marybeth returned to the stove. Silas followed. The door creaked shut behind him. "You think they'll come back today?" Silas shook his head. "Not yet." Marybeth stirred the pot. Steam rose around her face. "What are they waiting for?" Silas sat again. Chair creaking under his weight. More men. The room went quiet except for the stew bubbling. Warm air pressed against the windows. But the cold outside felt closer. Later that afternoon they rode out to the west pasture. Fence repairs again. The sky stretched pale and wide above them. Silas hammered a new post into the ground. Bang! 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 Marybeth pulled the wire tight. The metal sang under tension. A hawk cried somewhere high overhead. Then the sound came. Hooves. Fast this time. Marybeth looked up. A horse raced along the creek trail. A boy rode it hard. Dust flying behind him. He pulled the reins sharp near the fence. The horse skidded to a stop. "Mr. Boone." Silas dropped the hammer. The boy leaned forward in the saddle. Breath coming fast. "They're in town." Silas stepped closer. "Who?" "Langley's men." The boy wiped sweat from his forehead. "They rode in this morning." Marybeth's grip tightened on the wire. The metal snapped loose from the post. "What did they do?" The boy swallowed. "They're asking about the map." Silas's jaw hardened. The boy continued. "They went to the trading post first. Then the saloon." Marybeth stepped closer. "And?" The boy hesitated. "They broke a man's jaw." Silas's eyes darkened. "Which man?" "Old Carter." Marybeth gasped softly. The boy shifted nervously in the saddle. "They told everyone." His voice dropped. "They'll burn half the valley before letting that map slip away." Wind swept across the pasture. The grass hissed low. Silas looked toward the distant hills. Langley wasn't searching anymore. He was hunting. Marybeth turned away from the fence. "They'll come here next." Silas nodded. "Yes." The boy tugged his reins. "My pa said to warn you." Silas gave a short nod. "Tell your pa thanks." The boy kicked his horse and rode back toward town. Hooves fading down the trail. Marybeth stared after him. Silence stretched across the pasture. Only the wind remained. She spoke quietly. "We should leave." Silas looked at her. "Leave where?" Marybeth pointed west. "Anywhere." Silas shook his head. "If we run, they chase." Marybeth's shoulders sagged. The wire clinked softly against the fence post. "They'll destroy this place." Silas glanced toward the ranch house far across the fields. Small. Lonely. But alive again. Smoke drifting from the chimney. He picked up the hammer. Bang. 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 The post sank deeper into the ground. "We finished the fence." Marybeth watched him a moment. Then she lifted the wire again. Work resumed. Metal humming. Hammer striking wood. Noise pushing against the wide silence of the prairie. Evening came slow. The sky turned deep orange behind the hills. Inside the ranch house the stove roared. Marybeth set bread on the table. Silas closed the door behind him. Cold air swirled around his boots. The house felt warm again. Safe. For the moment. They ate quietly. Only the crackle of fire and the scrape of spoons filled the room. Then a sound drifted through the night. Faint. Far off. Hoofbeats. Marybeth froze. Silas lifted his head. The hoofbeats didn't stop. They multiplied. More than one rider now. Maybe 3. Maybe 5. Moving along the ridge in the darkness. The mule brayed outside. The fire popped loud in the stove. Silas stood slowly, boot leather scraping the floor. He walked to the window. The prairie lay black beneath the moon. But along the ridge, small shadows moved against the sky. Marybeth whispered behind him, "They're coming closer." Silas didn't answer. He watched the riders for a long time, until they vanished again into the dark hills. The wind returned across the prairie, cold, restless. Inside the house the fire still burned warm, but the quiet no longer felt safe. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Night pressed heavy over the Boone ranch. Clouds smothered the moon. Wind dragged across the grass in long restless sighs. Inside the house the stove burned bright. Logs cracked. Iron hummed warm. Marybeth Hale sat at the table with the tin box in front of her. Her fingers rested on the lid. Still. Silas Boone leaned against the wall near the door, rifle across his knees. The wood creaked softly when he shifted. Neither spoke. Outside the mule stamped once, hooves grinding the dirt. Then quiet again. Marybeth finally opened the tin box. The metal hinge squealed faint. The folded hide waited inside, dark stains across its surface. She lifted it carefully. Leather crackling. Silas watched without moving. Marybeth spread the map across the table. The oil lamp flickered low beside it. Symbols swam in the yellow light. Trail marks. Water. Canyon. And the deeper carving near the center. The marks Silas had named before. Peace Cache. Marybeth traced the circle with her finger. My husband believed something else was hidden there. Silas didn't answer yet. Wind brushed the window. The boards groaned under the gust. Marybeth looked up. You never told me everything. Silas lifted his eyes from the rifle. What part? The part where men would hunt us for it. Silas's voice stayed low. You already knew that. Marybeth shook her head slowly. I knew they wanted it. Her hand pressed flat against the hide. But I didn't know why. The stove popped behind them. A spark hissed against the iron door. Warmth filled the room. But the air between them stayed cold. Silas pushed away from the wall. His boots thudded the floor once. He walked to the table. The map lay open between them. This mark. He tapped the carved circle. Apache tribes used it during the wars. Marybeth watched his finger. To hide things? Silas nodded. Yes. What things? Silas leaned closer to the lamp. Proof. Proof of land. Proof of peace treaties. Marybeth's breath caught slightly. So the canyon holds documents. Silas nodded again. Maybe gold too. But that's not what Langley wants. Marybeth frowned. What then? Silas looked straight at her. Control. Silence filled the house. Only the fire crackled. Marybeth sank slowly into the chair. If he finds those treaties, he could destroy them. Silas nodded once. Marybeth whispered. Erase the tribe's claims. The wind outside rose suddenly. The barn door slammed once. Marybeth jumped. Silas turned his head toward the sound. Then the mule brayed sharp. Loud. Panicked. Silas moved fast. The rifle lifted from the table. He crossed the floor in 2 strides. The door flew open. Cold air burst inside. Darkness swallowed the yard. But the mule reared against its rope, snorting, ears pinned toward the ridge. Silas stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath him. He listened. Wind through the grass. A loose shutter tapping the wall. Then the sound. Soft. But real. Hooves. More than before. Marybeth stepped behind him. Her voice barely above a breath. How many? Silas narrowed his eyes toward the hills. 6. Maybe more. Shadows moved along the ridge line. Dark shapes crossing the pale sky. Watching again. But closer now. Marybeth hugged her coat tight. They're surrounding us. Silas didn't answer. The riders paused on the ridge. One horse turned sideways. The rider looked straight toward the ranch. Even from this distance, Silas could feel it. The stare. Then the riders moved again. Sliding down the far side of the hill. Gone. Silence returned. Marybeth exhaled slowly. They're waiting. Silas stepped back inside. The door shut with a heavy thud. Warmth rushed around them again. But the house felt smaller now. Like a lantern surrounded by wolves. Marybeth folded the map slowly. Her hands trembled slightly. What happens if they come tonight? Silas rested the rifle against the wall. They won't. How do you know? Silas stared at the stove fire. Langley liked power. And power needed witnesses. He'll come in daylight. Marybeth slid the hide back into the tin box. The lid snapped shut. Metal ringing through the quiet room. She looked up. If we reach the canyon first. Silas nodded slowly. We might stop him. Marybeth stood. Resolve tightening in her face. Then we ride tomorrow. Silas studied her. The firelight flickered across her eyes. Fear still there. But something stronger beside it. Silas finally nodded. Before sunrise. Marybeth blew out a slow breath. The stove popped again. The house settled around them. Outside the prairie stretched wide and dark. Wind whispering through the grass. But somewhere beyond the hills, Victor Langley's riders waited in the cold. And morning was coming. Before sunrise the ranch felt colder than usual. The sky hung black above the prairie. Wind dragged across the grass in low restless waves. Inside the house the stove burned bright. Logs cracked. Iron hummed. Marybeth Hale wrapped a scarf around her neck. Her breath drifted pale in the lamplight. Silas Boone stood near the door tightening the saddle straps on his rifle sling. Leather creaked softly. The tin box rested on the table. Marybeth looked at it once more. You sure we ride now? Silas nodded. Before Langley wakes. Marybeth lifted the box. The metal clinked quietly. Silas opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. The mule shifted in the yard. Hooves grinding frozen dirt. Silas stepped onto the porch. The prairie stretched dark and silent. For a moment. Nothing moved. Marybeth followed him out. Boots crunching frost. The mule snorted as they approached. Silas untied the rope. Then the sound came. Hooves. Many. Not distant. Close. Marybeth froze. Silas turned toward the ridge. Shapes appeared along the hill. Black against the pale dawn. Riders. More than before. 10 maybe. Langley rode at the front. Long coat moving in the wind. Marybeth whispered. We're too late. Silas stepped in front of her. Boots planted on the frozen ground. The riders spread out slowly. Hooves thudding closer. Dust lifting in the cold air. They circled the yard. Cutting off the trail. Langley stopped his horse near the fence. Leather creaked as he leaned forward. Morning, Mr. Boone. Silas didn't answer. Sheriff Rusk rode beside Langley. His badge caught the early light. You planning a ride? Silas rested one hand on the porch rail. Just stretching the mule. Langley chuckled softly. His eyes slid toward Marybeth. I think not. The wind pushed across the yard. Cold against their faces. Langley nodded toward the house. You have something that belongs to me. Silas's voice stayed flat. No. Langley's smile faded. Behind him the riders shifted in their saddles. Rifles resting across their legs. The mule stamped nervously. Marybeth gripped the tin box tighter. Langley noticed. His eyes sharpened. There it is. Marybeth stepped back. Silas moved with her, blocking the rider's view. Sheriff Russ cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hale, by county authority." Silas cut him off. "There's no county authority out here." Wind rattled the barn door. The sound echoed across the yard. Langley sighed. "I tried being polite." He lifted a hand. Two riders nudged their horses forward. Silas stepped off the porch, boots crunching hard. The rifle came up into his hands, wood and steel steady. The riders halted. Langley steadied him. "You're willing to start a war over a map?" Silas's eyes stayed calm. "You started it." Langley's voice hardened. "That map leads to something valuable." Silas shook his head. "No." Langley leaned closer in the saddle. "Gold." Silas met his gaze. "Peace." The word hung in the cold air. The riders shifted again. Marybeth stepped beside Silas, her voice clear. "The canyon holds Apache treaties." Sheriff Russ blinked. Langley's jaw tightened. Marybeth continued. "Proof of land. Proof of agreements." Silas spoke again. "If you destroy those papers, you erase their claim to half this valley." Wind swept dust across the yard. Langley's smile returned slowly. "Cold. So you do understand." He straightened in the saddle. "All the more reason I should own them." Marybeth stepped forward. "You'll never keep it secret." Langley shrugged. "Who will stop me?" Silence fell. Only the wind moved. Silas lowered the rifle slightly. "Not surrender. Just enough to breathe." Langley watched him, then laughed. "I thought you were a fighter, Boone." Silas's voice came quiet. "I am." Langley gestured toward the riders. 10 rifles now pointed loosely toward the house. "You're outnumbered." Silas nodded once. "Yes." Langley leaned down again. "Give me the map." Marybeth's hands tightened around the tin box. Silas glanced at her, then back at Langley. "No." The moment snapped tight. Langley's hand dropped. One rider kicked his horse forward, rifle lifting. The first shot cracked across the yard. The mule screamed. Marybeth ducked behind the porch rail. Silas moved like a man remembering old habits. The rifle fired once. The sound slammed against the barn walls. One rider tumbled from the saddle. Horses reared. Men shouted. Gunfire shattered the morning quiet. Wood splintered along the porch post. Silas pulled Marybeth toward the doorway. Inside, they stumbled through the door. The stove roared behind them, warmth clashing against the cold chaos outside. More shots. Bullets punched through the barn boards. Marybeth crouched near the table, the tin box still clutched in her hands. Silas leaned against the doorframe, rifle steady again. Another shot. Another rider's hat spun into the dust. Outside, Langley shouted orders. Hooves thundered. The prairie exploded with noise. Inside the house, the fire crackled steady. Silas chambered another round, his voice low. "They wanted the map." Marybeth looked up, fear in her eyes. "And now?" Silas lifted the rifle again. "Now they'll have to earn it." Smoke drifted across the Boone ranch yard. Gunfire had faded. Only the wind moved now. Dust rolled low through the broken fence line. Silas Boone stepped slowly onto the porch, boots crunching splintered wood. The rifle rested heavy in his hands. The barn wall showed fresh scars where bullets had struck. One of Langley's horses wandered loose near the gate, saddle empty. Marybeth Hale followed him out, the tin box still clutched against her chest. Her breath trembled in the cold morning air. Across the yard, 3 riders lay in the dirt. The rest had scattered, Langley among them. Silas watched the ridge, waiting, listening. But the prairie had gone quiet again. Marybeth spoke softly. They ran. Silas nodded once. For now. The wind rattled the barn door. Loose boards knocked together with dull thuds. Marybeth stepped closer. What do we do now? Silas looked toward the west hills. The red ridge where the canyon waited. We finish it. Marybeth tightened her grip on the tin box. They'll come back. Silas didn't argue. He only walked toward the mule. The saddle creaked as he tightened the straps. Marybeth climbed onto the mule behind him. The metal hinge of the tin box clinked softly. Silas turned the mule west. They rode. The prairie stretched wide beneath a pale sky. Cold wind rushed past their faces. Grass whispered beneath the mule's hooves. Silence again. But not peaceful. Behind them smoke still drifted from the ranch house chimney. Ahead the red hills rose slow against the horizon. The ride took hours. Sun climbing higher. Heat beginning to push the frost from the ground. Marybeth held the map open against the wind. The leather snapped softly in the air. Next mark is the stone arch. Silas scanned the ridge ahead. Then he saw it. Two red rocks leaning together. An old natural arch carved by time. They rode beneath it. The canyon opened beyond. Walls rising steep and narrow. Shade swallowed the trail. Cold again. The mule's hooves echoed against the stone. Clop. 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 Marybeth's voice lowered. This is it. Silas dismounted. Boots hitting gravel. The canyon held a deep quiet. Wind barely reached this place. He studied the rock wall. Then the map. One more mark. A crooked symbol carved beside a narrow ledge. Silas climbed the slope. Stone scraped under his boots. Marybeth waited below. Heart pounding loud in the still canyon. Silas reached the ledge. His fingers brushed the rock. There. A loose slab. He shoved. Stone shifted. Dust spilled into the air. Behind the slab a dark hollow opened. Silas reached inside. Wood scraped softly. He pulled out a small chest. Old. Weathered. Bound with iron bands. Marybeth climbed up beside him. Her eyes wide. That's it. Silas carried the chest down to the canyon floor. They set it on a flat stone. The iron latch groaned as it opened. Inside lay bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Silas unrolled the first one. Paper. Old parchment. Marybeth leaned closer. Symbols. Signatures. Apache leaders. Government seals. Treaties. Silas opened another bundle. Gold coins clinked softly against each other. But Marybeth barely noticed. Her fingers hovered over the papers. My husband was right. Silas nodded slowly. Proof. Proof that the valley belonged partly to the tribes. Proof Langley could never erase if the truth reached town. Wind whispered through the canyon mouth. Then another sound. Hooves. Marybeth's head snapped up. Silas turned toward the entrance. 3 riders appeared at the canyon edge. Langley rode in front. Dust clung to his coat. His smile returned. Tighter now. But still there. Told you we'd meet again. Marybeth stepped in front of the chest. Langley dismounted slowly. Boots grinding gravel. His men spread out behind him. Rifles ready. Langley's eyes drifted to the open chest. The papers. The gold. So it's true. Silas lifted the rifle again. Langley stopped a few steps away. No need for that. His voice smooth again. All I want is the box. Marybeth shook her head. These papers belong to the tribes. Langley shrugged. They belonged. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. Wind slipped down the canyon walls. Cold. Sharp. Langley studied him. Then his smile faded completely. You really believe anyone will care about those treaties? Silas answered quiet. Yes. Langley's eyes narrowed. And if they don't? Silas tilted his head toward the canyon entrance. Town's expecting us. Langley glanced back at the trail. Uncertainty flickered in his face. Silas stepped closer to the chest. Every man in Dry Creek knows you're hunting this map. Marybeth added quietly. And they know why. The wind rose again. Dust swirling across the canyon floor. Langley's jaw tightened. His riders shifted. Silas held the rifle steady. Right away, Langley. For a long moment no one moved. Then Langley spat into the dust. He turned his horse slowly. This isn't finished. Silas watched him ride out. The canyon echoed with fading hoofbeats. Silence returned. Marybeth knelt beside the chest again. Her fingers brushed the treaties. The papers rustled softly in the wind. Proof. At last, spring arrived slow across the Boone ranch. Snow melted into dark soil. Wind moved softer through the tall grass. The barn door creaked open with the morning breeze. Inside the house the stove burned low. Not fighting cold anymore. Just warming the room. Marybeth Hale stood by the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. Steam curled into the sunlight. Outside the mule grazed near the fence line. Hooves shifting through fresh grass. The porch boards groaned. Silas Boone stepped out carrying a small hammer and a handful of nails. Fence repairs never truly ended. Marybeth watched him cross the yard. His boots moved slower now. Not tired. Just calm. She opened the door. The hinges complained softly. Fence again? Silas glanced over his shoulder. Always. The hammer struck wood. Tap. 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 The sound carried across the quiet field. Not gunfire. Not hooves. Just work. Marybeth stepped onto the porch. Warm air brushed her face. The valley stretched wide beyond the pasture. Green now. Alive again. Down the road a wagon creaked slowly toward the ranch. Wood wheels turning through dirt. Marybeth shaded her eyes. Visitors. Silas drove the last nail into the fence post. The hammer rang once against the metal head. Then he straightened. Two riders followed the wagon. One wore the blue cloth of an Apache elder. The other rode beside him carrying a leather satchel. Silas walked to the gate. The wagon stopped outside the fence. Dust settled around the wheels. The elder dismounted slowly. Age had bent his shoulders but not his gaze. He stepped forward and studied the ranch house. The porch. The barn. The wide open valley. Marybeth came down from the porch. Her boots pressed softly into the dirt. The elder spoke in a calm, steady voice. You protected what others would have stolen. Silas nodded once. The treaties belong to your people. The elder opened the satchel. Inside lay the same old papers. Carefully wrapped now. Preserved. He placed a small bundle in Silas's hands. A carved wooden token. Apache markings etched along its surface. Peace marker. Silas turned it over slowly. The wood felt smooth. Warm. The elder continued. This valley remembers who defended it. Wind brushed the grass around them. Soft. The mule snorted near the fence. Marybeth looked toward the hills. For a moment. Just a moment. She wondered if Langley might appear again. But the ridges stayed empty. The elder climbed back into the wagon. Before leaving he looked once more at Silas and Marybeth. You gave the valley a future. The wagon creaked away down the road. Wheels grinding slowly through the dust. Silas leaned against the fence post. The hammer still in his hand. Marybeth stood beside him. Watching the wagon disappear beyond the rise. Do you think Langley will return? Silas looked toward the distant hills. The same hills where riders once waited. For a moment the wind picked up. grass bending low. But no riders appeared. Silas shook his head. Men like him prefer easy fights. Marybeth smiled faintly. Then this valley just became difficult. They walked back toward the house together. The porch swing moved gently in the breeze. Boards creaking soft. Marybeth sat down. The rope groaned under her weight. Silas leaned against the porch rail. The wooden peace token rested in his palm. Inside the house the stove crackled quietly. Coffee simmered again. The same sounds that once filled an empty home. But now the silence felt different. Not hollow. Peaceful. Marybeth looked across the pasture. Funny. Silas glanced at her. What is? The map brought trouble. She nodded toward the hills. But it also brought me here. Silas rested the hammer against the porch rail. The wood tapped lightly. You fixed more than fences. Marybeth laughed softly. The sound drifted across the yard. Warm. Real. The mule wandered near the porch. Its harness jingled gently as it grazed. Wind moved through the cottonwood trees. Leaves whispering together. The porch swing creaked again. Back and forth. Slow. Steady. The same house that once echoed with empty wind now held quiet life. Silas looked across the valley. Sunlight spread gold across the grass. A new season. A new beginning. And the sound of the porch swing rocking gently in the breeze carried through the warm afternoon. A peaceful sound. One that meant the war had finally passed. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.